Joining us now with the very latest from Tel Aviv is our correspondent, Alex Cadier. Alex, thank you so much for your time. Now, one of the things that aid organizations have always been lamenting about was, the call for ceasefire so that they would allow aid agencies to safely distribute, aid to Palestinians trapped in Gaza. Just talk to us about this latest incident where 7 aid workers were killed during an airstrike.
Yeah, well, we have more details, more disturbing details of exactly what happened. That's being reported in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Defense sources close to the situation speaking to Haaretz, describing a convoy of aid going into the warehouse, the World Central Kitchen warehouse in Deir el-Balah, with 3 cars and a truck on which defense sources say an armed man was identified. The truck and the armed man stayed in the warehouse. The 3 cars drove back, and at that point we understand a drone fired a missile at one of the cars. Now, survivors in the first car tried to leave, take refuge in the second car, when we understand that from the reporting that at this point they called for help, saying they were under attack, and the second missile hit the second car. Again, they tried to seek refuge in the third car before the third missile hit that car as well, killing all 7 of the aid workers on board. So a very tragic, very serious situation. We heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu calling it a tragic case of our forces unintentionally hitting innocent people in Gaza. He also said this happens in war and that he will work with the governments of those who have been killed and the Israeli Defense Forces to make sure this never happens again. But a very, very serious, very, very tragic incident for those involved, for their families, but also for the starving people of Gaza. As you rightly pointed out, if we speak to aid agencies operating on the ground, they would point to World Central Kitchen as being one of those agencies able to make some, even a small impact, but some impact in Gaza to feed the starving population there. Well, now the World Central Kitchen, because of fears over the safety of their workers, have now suspended their operations in Gaza, and we understand the ships that had been unloading food were immediately turned around and are now back in Cyprus with 240 tons of food undelivered to the people of Gaza. So this will have consequences, of course, for those aid workers who have tragically lost their lives, but also for tens of thousands of starving Palestinians in Gaza.
Indeed. And now, Alex, just to paint a picture, of course, this is a US-based aid group with staff from Australia, Poland, the UK, as well as US-Canada citizens. Talk to us a little bit about this independent professional body that is now meant, to investigate, because as you rightfully say, this now points to this being a targeted airstrike.
Well, just to be very clear, it's not that the Israeli Defense Forces were specifically targeting World Central Kitchen staff. What we understand from the reporting on Haaretz is that they were under the impression that an armed man, which they identified as a terrorist, was in the initial convoy. Now, clearly, Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear that this was a tragic mistake by Israeli forces. Now, when it comes to that investigation, they have said that it will be investigated at the highest levels. And we've heard the Australian Prime Minister, the British Foreign Secretary, Anthony Blinken in the United States calling for a thorough investigation into this. There will be enormous pressure internationally from Israel's closest allies to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. And as we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, to make sure this absolutely never happens again. It is a tragedy, particularly as even Daniel Hagari, the spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces, described this as a crucial mission to deliver food. But again, this will be a real tragedy for those in Gaza trying to find any food they can. We know that the airdrops are ongoing, but airdrops are just not enough to the scale of hunger facing the people in Gaza. So certainly this will have a very serious political consequences, a lot of pressure internationally. That independent investigation will look into the details, but as we see from reporting in Haaretz, clearly this strike is one where a very deadly and tragic mistake was made.
Alex, just bring us up to speed in terms of that virtual meeting then that was meant to happen between the US and Israel yesterday, I believe, via video call. Of course, this as, the World Health Organization describing the Al-Shifa hospital there in Gaza amounting to ripping the heart out of the health system of the war-torn Palestinian enclave. Just a sense of what the discussions entailed.
Yeah, well, two separate issues there. Now, these discussions between the United States and Israel were specifically about the southern city of Rafah and Israel's desire to continue its military operation in that city. And the United States has been very clear, unless there is a very clear and functioning plan to evacuate civilians, they are in full opposition to an operation in Rafah. Now, we have a readout from the White House about that virtual meeting, saying that the United States and Israeli officials shared the common goal of eliminating Hamas in Rafah, but that the US expressed real concerns about how Israel plans to do that. Now, the Israelis have said they promise to take into account those concerns expressed by the United States, and that the delegations will meet again in person as early as next week. But clearly this operation in Rafah, which Prime Minister Netanyahu has said no amount of US or international pressure will stop Israel from doing, that operation is a very clear dividing line between Israel and its biggest ally, the United States.
Just as a final issue to discuss, of course, Iran has now come back and warned Israel of a harsh response following that attack on the embassy. Just give us an update on what's happening there.
Well, to be clear, the airstrike is widely being attributed to Israel, but Israel has not confirmed that they were behind this strike, which killed 2 Iranian Revolutionary Guard generals who were responsible for Iran's relationship in Lebanon and Syria, therefore its relationship with Hezbollah, the group which has been firing rockets into northern Israel for weeks. And we've seen Israeli retaliation to that, airstrikes deep into Lebanon and Syria. Now, the supreme leader of Iran saying that Israel will be made to pay for what he described as this crime, and this will prompt real fears of escalation now across the Middle East. We've heard Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, saying that every day and everywhere where Israeli forces will strike to prevent the buildup of enemy troops. And there's a real concern that what has been a simmering conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, with Hezbollah firing rockets at civilian populations in Israel, and Israeli forces having targeted airstrikes across Lebanon, Syria, and the areas in southern Lebanon where Hezbollah operates, that could now turn into an all-out war because of this strike and because of Iran's retaliation.